Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the HR briefing. The topic today is a legislative update. So that's why we have some visitors with us this morning. We have Congressman Glenn Grothman, State Representative Gordon Hintz, and Corporate Counsel Jonathan R. Iden. And we are led today by Jim Macy and Tony Wakowitz of Von Briesen and Roper. So thank you again for joining this morning. I'm going to be monitoring. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop those below, and I can kind of signal that we have some questions. But otherwise, this is recorded, so everyone can reference it later. It will be on our website under our web archives. So without wasting any more time, I will introduce Jim.
Well, good morning and thanks. We really appreciate it. And welcome to everybody. This is our annual program. We're going on over 20 years of doing legislative updates on an annual basis, at least 20 years, if not more than that. And as we were talking, this is several years in a row now that we've had the pleasure of having Congressman Grothman and State Representative Hintz join us for this program. And we really appreciate that, to get their words in terms of what they're seeing from both the federal side of things and the state side of things. And one of my colleagues within our employment section, Tony Wakowitz, is joining us this morning. John Iden is not with us this morning. He got called out of town. He's with the Voith Company now, but won't be able to join us, and sends his regards. But with that, again, we are open to questions as we go along. And we'll start first with Congressman Grothman from the federal side of things. And again, Congressman, we really appreciate you joining and helping as usual on the annual basis. Good morning.
Sure. Well, always glad to check in, kind of give you an update as far as what's going on. Obviously, there's some things. Should we go ahead here?
Sure, absolutely. Why don't we talk about what you're seeing from the federal side of things? Really.
Well, I think as far as employer law is concerned, I think a major concern we have isn't necessarily directly on the federal law as much as we have a shortage of people right now in the workforce. And I think one way to handle that, I am on the Education and Labor Committee, is to try to steer more people early on to what I call skills-based education. We are behind the scenes working on a higher education bill, which we will pass if the Republicans get the majority in January. That bill is much more designed to lead people towards tech-based education, that sort of thing. I think the perception out there, which I think is an accurate perception, is we have too many people getting college degrees, winding up in debt, and those degrees don't necessarily lead to the type of job you need to pay off that debt. So whether it's changing the adjustments to the Pell Grants, adjustments to student loans, I think in the future, hopefully within the next 2 years, we'll see changes there. And I don't care whether you're talking about the medical field, the construction field, the manufacturing field, all three are having a desperate problem finding people who have the skills necessary to grow our economy. The one thing that did pass out of the House that I think would affect you guys is something called Securing a Strong Retirement Act. I know one thing that's been very bipartisan is that both sides agree we want more people saving for retirement. And one way to do that is to have more plans available or make access to the plans easier. What we're doing is in the future, and right now they're working on something similar in the Senate. I do believe something's going to pass by the end of the year. We want to have a situation in which people have to opt out of a retirement plan, a 401k, rather than opt in. So what's going to happen is if employees don't do anything, they're going to wind up having 3% of their income withheld. They can opt out of that if they want to, but that's the default mechanism because we feel right now there are still not enough people paying. That requirement is not there if you have 10 or fewer employees or for businesses that are less than 3 years old. We're also going to make it easier for nonprofits to get involved in similar sort of plans as this, which should be good as well. I'd kind of be interested in your input as far as percentage wise, the number of employees who are taking advantage of your retirement plans. We're also, to encourage people to get involved in there, allowing you to give de minimis gifts to people who sign up for the plans. And by de minimis, we mean under $100. So that's a little bit as far as what's going on there. I think the major things that people are focusing right now in Washington, things that were not necessarily bills that were specific. Oh, by the way, I want to tell you something else that may affect you. I have a bill that I'd like to believe has some chance of passing. Right now, if you've got older employees, they're on Social Security, they're making more than $19,000 a year. You make over $19,000 a year, they begin to take away your Social Security benefits, which means if you do opt into Social Security, all of a sudden you're 68 years old. You say, hey, wait a minute, I could work more than, whatever, 7 or 8 hours a week, but I can't because of my Social Security. We want to bump that up from 19,000 to 29,000. I've talked to several employers who do have employees in that position. They would like to work more, but we take away your Social Security. Given that I think the biggest problem for HR professionals right now is finding people to work more hours, I think that would be a good thing. And I really can't find any serious opposition, although it could cost money in the sense that it will encourage more people to retire earlier, which some people may feel would put stress on Social Security. So the other major issues, I think we have a bigger problem at the border than people would have anticipated. I was on the border last week, and the number of people coming across there from all over the world is, I think, much greater than people are aware. President Biden plans on changing the law in May, which will further increase that amount. We may have 300,000 or 400,000 people a month coming across, which I think is unsustainable for the country. But that's obviously a big issue. A big issue is what's going on in the Ukraine. I am a little bit worried there, and that I do not think we are aggressively looking to wrap that situation up. I am very worried about it. I think other members of Congress, and quite frankly, the Biden administration, ought to be very worried about it, insofar as eventually Russia may look at the involvement of the United States over there, which I think is stronger than the average person realizes, and feel the United States should pay a price for that. And the sooner this thing ends, any war is going to have to end with some sort of negotiated settlement. The sooner we push towards a negotiated settlement, the quicker we don't have to worry about that. The longer this drags on, however well it goes on the ground, you're going to wind up with the situation in which Russia may feel that Western Europe or the United States should be paying part of a price for this. I do not want that to happen. And we have a problem on both Republican and Democrats here. I personally believe the Republicans as well are not conscious of the fact that somehow Vladimir Putin's got to get an off ramp here so we can end this. Not just, like I said, not just for the human cost of civilians and troops on the ground, but we do not want to wind up having a situation where Russia begins to shoot down our satellites, that sort of thing, which would be devastating for our economy. So I try to encourage the Biden administration, when I have met with the cabinet members, that we have to be looking for a way to end this war. It's good we're helping Ukraine. I voted for, sending billions of dollars of munitions to Ukraine, but people have to realize that with a country with the capabilities of Russia, there are things we do not want to have happen. And I'm not sure that concern is great enough. I'm also concerned about what's going on in Taiwan. I went with members of the Taiwan consulate out of Chicago a couple of weeks ago. And I think since I've had this job, there was more tension than there ever has been in the past. In the past, those meetings were always kind of jolly, perfunctory things. This time around, there was a little bit of an edge. And I'm going to try to talk to the Biden administration about that as well. If China would invade Taiwan, I think that's going to be much more significant than what happened in Ukraine. Of course, the Ukraine is so significant. So it's something else I hope we kind of dial down the temperature on. That's a little bit of my overview.
Can I, let me ask you a couple of things that are popping up a little bit and that have come across earlier, Congressman, if I can. But for example, the minimum wage gets some dialogue periodically, and then it came through the news a little bit last week again. Do you see any serious momentum on that or debate that our HR professionals ought to think about?
Well, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I believe I have this right. He was paying $11 an hour for 14-year-olds with no work experience. That was the first day on the job. So as a practical matter, we're well above minimum wage. I think usually for political reasons, there's a vote on minimum wage, but it's very difficult to get a bill like that through the Senate. It's very easy for even one senator to hold up things. And for that reason, I'd be really surprised if that passed. And like I said, when I talk to employers out there, what they're paying now compared to a few years ago is just very high. And that was just an interesting anecdote. I think it was fast food, $11 for 14-year-olds who have never worked before. Your first week, $11 an hour.
I appreciate that. And again, just a couple of the other issues that are percolated through the PRO Act was the act.
Good point. Good point. We should talk about the PRO Act. They have this rule in the Senate that requires 60 votes to break a filibuster and pass something. And it received a lot of national publicity because of that rule. Joe Biden was not able to pass his Build Back Better bill, which is, depending who's doing the counting, over $3 trillion bill. And it's a good thing it didn't pass. But I don't think the public is aware of all the other bills that are not passing because of the 60 vote requirement. And one of those is the PRO Act. The PRO Act would allow a union to come in and say with as little as 14 days notice, you've got to have a vote on whether or not to unionize. You have to turn over to the union the email address, the home address of all of your employees, and the phone number of all your employees. It would create a situation in which if the government felt you had done anything inappropriate leading up to the vote, that they could decide, even though hypothetically none of your employees wanted a union, they could decide that you would have to become unionized. I think it would incredibly change America. It would also lump together different franchises. So, maybe you have a franchise, a McDonald's franchise, and none of your employees want to unionize, but it would lump it together with other franchises and you would wind up unionized in that regard. It would be a very devastating piece of legislation. It's not going to pass now because of the 60 vote requirement in the Senate. It did come out of the House of Representatives. Very scary in the future, and that bill I think would become law if there were 52 Democrats instead of 50 Democrats in the Senate. Now, the type of people who guess on this say this will be a good year for Republicans, and then we wouldn't have to worry about the PRO Act passing next year. But it's such a radical piece of legislation, everybody should be aware of it and think, if we have two of the Republicans pass away or something or other in the Senate, it could still become law.
Yeah, I was just curious because as I understood it, that it did pass the House, but didn't pass but does it have to go back to the House or is it just pending in the Senate?
Well, if they made any adjustments, it would have to pass the House again. But it is a scary thing because it's such a radical piece of legislation. And I believe every Democrat in the House voted for it, either everyone or all but one. And, can you imagine all of a sudden you think everything's going smoothly and you find out in 2 weeks you've got to have a vote to unionize, and you've got to turn over to the prospective union the email address, the home address, and the phone number of all your employees. Maybe people show up at the house of some of your employees. I mean, so it's a scary piece of legislation, a very radical piece of legislation. I don't think it's the type of thing that would have gone anywhere 6 years ago, but at least we're told right now a lot of the unions going into the election are requiring candidates sign off on this, and they certainly got all the candidates to sign off in the House of Representatives last time. So it tells you where we could be going as a country, particularly because even though the rumor is, or people are speculating on the Republicans having a very good year, it shows what could become law a year from now.
Let me ask you, and then we'll switch over to State Representative Hintz, but a couple other quick things. Do you see, a couple of days ago, it was announced that the mask mandate regarding transportation would be removed, and so was. But we also have litigation still pending on the vaccine mandates. And do you see anything from a congressional standpoint on either of those things?
No, because it's so controversial. I mean, there are bills out there. I'm sponsoring bills on vaccine mandates. I don't think they're going to go anywhere because I think the Democrat Party, which is in charge, is not supportive of those bills. So I don't think you're going to see big changes. When you look at the border right now, the position of the Biden administration is that the COVID threat is disappearing, right? Because they're talking about changing the laws in May to allow everyone to come here. And in the past, people from Mexico or Central American countries were turned around because they felt there was a COVID threat. So the fact that the Biden administration is changing the laws at the border to let what could be hundreds of thousands of people a month come here, I think they'd be hard pressed to go any further on the idea that that the COVID is still a great threat.
Different issue, it related a little bit to your conversation about student loans and some of those aspects and the cost there. There's been discussions about forgiving student loans. There was discussion during the election. There was discussion last week about maybe some legislation in regards to that. Two things. Do you see any momentum on that? And do you see any other money coming through the federal government to employers for employment purposes, like we did a year ago in our program where we were talking about some of the CARES Act money, some of the other things to help people keep people employed? Do you see anything like that coming?
Well, there was another bill aimed at restaurateurs that came out of the House of Representatives, a significant amount of money. It was a tempting bill to vote on because some of the money in the past towards restaurateurs, quite frankly, was directed at people who weren't white. And that was struck down in court, but we still would have to put more money in a program like that. My personal opinion is we are so in debt and inflation is so out of control that there will be no more significant spending bills passing Congress. It doesn't mean that there won't be bills passing the House. You know, this restaurant bill passed 2 weeks ago, but I think the Republicans in the Senate would put the kibosh on any significant spending bills.
Okay, and then let me ask you one other thing that's coming through, and then let's switch. But there's what our companies are seeing through the Fox Valley and quite frankly across the state and other areas is a very serious uptick in agency activity in terms of wage and hour audits, in terms of discrimination issues, much more involved, good, bad, or indifferent, from the federal government agencies. And maybe this isn't a congressional aspect of things, but is there anything you might be able to add about that? For example, I'll give you an example. Wage and hour audits are up. And during the last year, there was some guidance that came out from the Department of Labor saying, we're going to relax the threshold looking at those that are exempt employees, not hourly employees, for wage and hour purposes to help people get back to work. So if they're doing more regular hourly work, we're not going to penalize companies. Well, now we're getting audits to say we are going to look at that. We're going to go back 2 years, even though we gave guidance to the contrary. Anything you can add to that? And again, I know that's really not bills related or other aspects, but it's a concern to the HR people online.
We'll try to bring it up. I'm sure with regard to just, it's not surprising, given who the Secretary of Labor is. It was one of, obviously one of the big differences is the degree to which people engage in those sort of audits. I would like to hear anecdotes from your members. In the past, there was going to be an effort made in the Obama administration to make it much easier to show that there was discrimination or claim discrimination. So it doesn't surprise me that the Biden administration is going down this route. They have been, the amount of verbiage coming out of that party, claiming we have all this racism and sexism in society, and they really believe it, which I think is kind of over the top, but they really believe it. But I'd love to have anecdotes here, and maybe we can highlight the problem so that Congress can begin to do something about it, particularly not in this year's budget, but next year's budget. We, by the way, right now are beginning to put together the budget for the calendar year beginning October 1st. Normally that doesn't pass until around Christmas, but it would be nice to get some anecdotes in there and see if we can insert something dampening down that sort of activity.
Okay, so let me do it for the people that are online, either contact Congressman Grothman's office or contact Tony and I, and we'll collect those. We have some already and we'll get you, but we'll collect those as well and do that. So thank you.
I'd love to talk to you guys about that later today.
Okay, sounds good. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about the state activities, and Gordon Hintz is here, and we really appreciate it again as well. So Gordon, good morning, and thanks again for helping out.
Good morning. Can you let me know, is this working? I'm on here with the audio from my phone and the video is from my laptop. I was having a unstable connection because Congressman Grothman won't pass the Build Back Better plan that will increase the speed of my internet. That's what I'm saying today. So I'm going to write my congressman later. I think it's I need to get the professional backdrop when I'm at home like this. I'm mostly just crossing my fingers that my children don't knock down my door. But I think my content will probably keep them asleep in terms of alienating them. Well, unless we're talking about trains. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Jim's always been great about setting these up, and I know the Congressman and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to professionals in this setting. A lot to learn and listen. I'll give you the, where we are in the 2-year cycle, a number of the issues at a macro level, what's happening. But again, I know that this group stays informed of things that are coming through, weighs in and lets us know about existing things or potential things that are going to be impacting the workplace. And I always say, I can't do my job unless I have people on the ground that are telling me how they're directly impacted. I've always thought of myself as a generalist who knows a little bit about everything. And you got to develop people on the ground in your district, hopefully, that can be resources. So appreciate the opportunity. We have concluded our legislative session. It appears for good. There are a couple days that you do every 2 years that are on the calendar. I think a few more at the end of May, but we're not expected to meet. So you'll kind of see things ramping up here as candidates get on the ballot and getting into election season. We've sort of had accelerated gridlock at the state level, where if you don't like a lot of new laws being passed, and I'd rather no laws passed than bad laws passed. Maybe you like that. I think some of the gridlock has been counterproductive. I think historically, when we've had divided government, there's still an effort to address contemporary challenges with public policy, but in compromise form. It's really been, Wisconsin is like a lot of states and quite frankly, the federal government in being unable to overcome, I think, a lot of the partisan gridlock that people are pretty tired of. The budget was passed on time, had some bipartisan support. Governor Evers signed it. We have a 2-year budget that goes July 1st of the odd year till June 30th, 2 years later. So biennial budget. I'll say the best thing that's happened, for us to all know, given where we were 2 years ago, because at this point, 2 years ago in the state, I was a minority leader working with the speaker and Senate majority leader and Senate minority leader in the governor's office on, what are the things that we actually can do at the state level, knowing that we don't have the money at the federal level, but laws that we can change to allow for this, amend workers' comp, other things to try to help an uncertain situation. And we were able to step up, I think, at that point and do certainly the minimum. But as someone who was in office, as the congressman was in Wisconsin during the Great Recession, where we lost $6.5 billion of annual revenue, or in our biennial budget, we, when you have the kind of implosion that we had in April of 2020, my question was going to be, what's the impact going to be on our economy? How long is this going to happen? And Wisconsin's economy was pretty resilient. All of you know that, 80% of the economy did pretty well. I mean, hospitality sector, service sector, it was a disproportionate impact in terms of who was most impacted. But we saw corporate revenue, sales tax revenue, with the stimulus from the Trump administration and the Biden administration, lead to consumer spending. And Wisconsin actually recovered faster in many ways than a lot of other states. And so I bring that up just to say, 80% of the revenue we get from income tax, sales tax, and corporate income tax. And our revenues are really good. In fact, they exceeded, when you do the budget, you do a 2-year projection on here's what we think things are going to cost. And here's what we think our revenue is going to be with some pretty conservative economic forecasts from people that are smarter than me. And we get a revenue update every January. So, we're coming up on almost a year into our budget, and we have significant, fund balance. When revenue exceeds what we planned on, we do have the rainy day fund. Kudos to both sides that have supported putting more money away for when it's raining. That was something Wisconsin for years had been terrible about, keeping money on hand in an account. But all indicators from a revenue standpoint are in pretty good shape. That being said, some of the tension between the legislative branch and the governor's office has been over, we had a record amount of revenue heading into the budget last year, and we saw very minimal increases, not even with inflation for the UW system. K-12 education, big disparities between where the governor was and where the legislature was. And same with local government funding. I mean, Governor Evers put $50 million more for cities throughout the state to put more money to hire law enforcement and other things. And that money was cut from the budget, even though we're sitting on, that would be 1% of the money that we're sitting on if we just wanted to fund resources for local law enforcement. And, I think that there seems to be, we're not going to give Governor Evers a win. We're not going to put any more money into the budget. We're going to sit on it, hope we take the revenue, the governor's office back, and then, look at ways to spend this, substantial fund balance that's out there. The other push has been to try to sort of micromanage or punish, I guess, the governor's office from with the federal money that's been available, which is more narrow in terms of what it can be used for. Same with the money that goes to school districts from the federal government that, well, the governor should, they'll pass a bill that says the governor has to spend federal money on this, or we're not going to give money to schools because they have all this extra money from COVID. And I think that's just politics. If you talk to administrators, it doesn't exactly meet what's on the ground. And as all of you know, you should never build out your budget based on one-time money. There are some things that the governor and the legislature support that have happened. Corrections employees, for instance, we were able to use federal money to address the shortage that we have with some one-time bonuses and some increases in pay. But 2 years from now, will the state backfill that money that's gone when the federal money's not there? And then what occurs? So that being said, we were able to do some things at the end of the year that I appreciated on juvenile corrections reform. Those of you that are familiar with Lincoln Hills, we were able to finally pass a bill that ensures that the rape testing kits through the Department of Justice are there was a fix that needed to be made. Things that just didn't make sense that they weren't getting done. So there were a few grateful in this environment we could get done. But the big, if you had said before COVID, what was the issue that kept you up most at night? And I'm pretty sure we were doing these panels, and I went back to my 2013 notes. I looked at some op-eds I wrote. I'm a demographic guy, I'm a data guy, and it wasn't just me. The numbers told us we were going to be in this position with the labor shortage. And with things like inflation or COVID or labor shortage, I'm in office, so I get it, but people often want there to be an answer, a fix, a magic wand. I've been rattling off these numbers for so long, I'm assuming they're mostly still accurate, but I think we're the 13th oldest state in the country. We're in a better position here in the Valley, quite frankly, than we are in a lot of other parts of the state in terms of a labor force, but we simply don't have enough people. Not enough people moving to the state, not enough birth replacement. Both the short-term and long-term numbers are challenging. I guess my message is one of honesty, because I've been dealing with long-term care providers, some other crucial professions out there, that it raises real questions. Well, what do we do if we can't fill these? They have to be filled because we, as a society, need it. There isn't a magic wand. We're going to be the real, I think, approach we need to take is how do we manage, how do we adjust, how do we look at flexibility or technology or innovation to adjust how we do things to meet the reality of the labor shortage that we're going to have. We have a people shortage. We don't have our unemployment is probably never been lower before. Our employee, number of people working in the state, our participation rate has always been higher than the national average. It remains high. There are, all of you, this number of old people, older Americans I see working I think they're there, and we've seen the market working in many ways, but we also know that that's also a factor in the inflation that we're seeing out there. Again, different sectors are going to be impacted differently, but yeah, it does keep me up all night at night. We've had a panel with the Hospitals Association on the healthcare workforce. I mentioned long-term care with Miranda Living in Oshkosh, just incredible challenges. And look, we can try to increase reimbursement rates. We can do tax incentives or other things. There was a bill that tried to allocate some funding for commercial driver's licenses because we don't have enough people driving trucks. And I'm not necessarily opposed to those things, but if we think that is going to solve things, we're wrong. To me, the Assembly this year passed an expungement bill that would eliminate, allow people who committed a nonviolent but felony crime before the age of 25 to get that. It built off of one that we passed earlier to be able to remove the obstacle for some employment opportunities because of their criminal record. To me, that's something both to give people a second chance, but also to expand the pool of people out there knowing that that's an obstacle for employment. I think we need to look at, what was my second one? UW-Oshkosh, for instance. We do need to look at our universities. UW-Oshkosh offers in-state tuition to Illinois students, which is considerably less than in-state tuition in Illinois. So they offer in-state tuition to students with a 3.5 or higher. Those students come to UW-Oshkosh. They've been able to track the retention numbers of how many of them stay in the state. Looking at expanding and highlighting things like that bring in talented, educated people that we make the investment in. If we keep 50% of them, that to me is a pretty good way to, then rather than putting up signs, I'm on the WEDC board. We're talking about talent attraction and retention, but so is every other state in the upper Midwest that's being challenged with these demographic factors. And so I think, we need to look at, well, are there ways that we can link in what UW system is doing, what our technical colleges are doing to try to bring people here, to kind of get them roped into internships, externships, opportunities that might make it easier for them to stay. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do. And then, to be honest with you, in the short, medium, and long term, while immigration is a federal issue and it's a hot button issue for a lot of people, I don't know how you do it otherwise. I know that immigration is different in Arizona perhaps than it is in Wisconsin, but I can tell you the agriculture industry, which I think well more than 50% of their labor is migrant labor, passing driver's cards for undocumented, so we don't have instances like all the people who died at the Seneca Foods plant during COVID that were put on a bus with their dead bodies that were quarantined in a Super 8 that were just dumped because they didn't really have any status, not even an ID card. I think is something that immigrants will come where there's opportunity, and if it's not apparent right now that we have a shortfall, I think we need to look down the road as we continue to push for reform at the federal level, but look at things at the state level that might make us a more desirable location for people, especially diverse populations that can fill a lot of the workforce needs that we have out there. Again, I always say, if you want to go where there's no undocumented workers, go to West Virginia, because if your economy is atrocious, they won't go there. Wherever the best economy is where migrant labor will gravitate to. And part of that is, if you look at Silicon Valley and other things when they first started, it was because there were policies in place that allowed for free movement of immigrants into areas. And I think whether you're talking about hospitality, healthcare, and agriculture, which probably capture most of our migrant workforce, it's something that seriously needs to be considered. Like the congressman said, I mean, we are, this is the summer that the agencies work on their budgets for the following year. So even if you have a change in the executive branch, those proposals get developed over time. And then, the executive branch after the election kind of gets 3 months to kind of gear those things. And so those are things that are happening now. COVID, we've had the fights over mandates and vaccines. I'm glad it's hard. There's a combination of fatigue and then that I think, we're in a better place. We've seen enough people, a lot of people get vaccinated, a lot of people that probably are either asymptomatic or, got infected and survived, that we've been pretty resilient, and I'm glad that we're making noticeable as people in Wisconsin get outside and aren't in the same room. But every time I think we're out of this, something else comes back. Clearly, there's some exhaustion that's out there. I'm not a big fan of politicizing public health, and I think we need to stay vigilant on this, knowing that it's a strange new world. I don't think anybody wants to spend their time fighting about mandates or masks or vaccines. I'm someone who's the vaccine bill author in Wisconsin years before COVID, related to getting rid of the personal exemption in schools because of the measles outbreaks that we've seen. Not undermining science, recognizing that, health freedom, my ability. I have kids under 5 who couldn't go outside because too many selfish people wouldn't get vaccinated. It's hard when I couldn't take them to the YMCA or library anymore. So when it's about freedom, it's my kids' freedom's impacted by everybody else's decision. So, that's my reality. I would say the one thing I will say to all of you, because I have the opportunity and I'm happy to get into some of the answers, is there's a lot of things going on right there now that maybe some ignore them, maybe some embrace, maybe some have a crazy uncle. But democracy is not a guarantee. When you have a bunch of traitors assault the Capitol and try to overturn the results of a democratic election, and you don't have accountability, and you have elected politicians that are embracing these traitors who should be locked up, quite frankly, and then you have politicians that are willing to spend hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars to buy into the idea that the election was stolen. you're undermining democracy. You're moving towards an authoritarian state. And the fact that we have an ex-president that continues to fan the flames and some shameless politicians that continue to waste taxpayer money, feeding the lies that undermine confidence. I mean, this is the stuff that Vladimir Putin has been trying to do with the viral ads, with the Russian bots, is to sow distrust in American democracy. The fact that we have American politicians that continue to fan the flames of those things is something that I find offensive as Americans. I find these people to be traitors. And then I think all good people need to stand up and realize that this is this is real. They're literally trying to push forward with the independent legislature doctrine that would allow legislatures to overturn the results of a democratic election. I also mentioned with legislative redistricting, you know, in 2011, after the big wave in 2010, we saw redistricting that changed more people out of more districts to skew the maps in a way that baked in the result than ever before. When it came time to do redistricting now, the legislature said, well, it's important that we change things as little as possible. So 10 years ago, we did the biggest change that created the most gerrymandered state in US history. And now we see the legislature saying, but we can't change it. You know, it's important we keep it the same. And then the Supreme Court used a criteria that has never been used in any state before. It's not a legal theory. It's never been a precedent to bake in maps that give one party permanent control over. It doesn't, you know, Joe Biden, Democrats would have to win the state of Wisconsin by more than 12 percentage points to have a chance at picking up a legislative majority, despite the fact that it's a 50-50 state. You know, I get it. I got Republican friends and it's good to be in control. And based on the distribution of voters, you know, we're always going to be a swing state. They probably have a good chance at having some control. But if you think it doesn't have an impact on governance, it does. And we shouldn't look the other way. It's undemocratic and it has an impact on our public policy. When we look how many people have left Wisconsin since 2010, it exceeds what other states are. We've seen an exodus of families and young families returning. And I think a lot of it has to do with the policies and these anti-democratic measures that are out there.
Let me pick up on some questions again, and I appreciate from both of you. Obviously, there's politics involved in the others. From the HR standpoint on the employment side of things, Gordon, do you see any movement back toward any governmental mandates from a state aspect? As I asked the congressman the same thing from the federal, I asked the same to you. Do you see any momentum for that anymore? And if politics aside, I mean.
No, I get it. I mean, so many narratives have been, I mean, all of us, regardless of maybe how we felt about how things were going, I think have experienced fatigue over both the discussions and living in reality, you know, mask, compliance, whatever. I don't think that there's much of an appetite, even from folks who may be somewhat supportive of protecting, you know, public health measures. Some of the bills that are clearly were going to get vetoed, we're going to get introduced and passed because there's an audience for those. And it is this, you know, we've always been a country with kind of competing values of rugged individualism and views of freedom around the individual, but also about the collective good. And I gave my example about my family doesn't have freedom if people choose to not do their part. You know, you don't get vaccinated to protect yourself, you get vaccinated to protect others. Businesses should be and allowed to have their own policies in place. But I don't think that there is going to be you know, any movement. I know protecting some things on the books that ultimately weren't utilized, some of the emergency orders at the local level with public health agencies and stuff, that we kind of got some boogeyman scenarios, but that weren't ever utilized. You know, I don't think there's going to be either utilization or exercising of the powers that exist in some of these cases, or a testing of those. And I also don't think that there's going to be acceptance to get rid of them.
And the reason, you know, I asked both of you, and Congressman, you as well, you know, on that issue is because it does impact a lot of employers, public sector and private sector here through the Fox Valley, whether it be our schools with some of the mandates, vaccines, you know, as to whether people got vaccinated or not. or our subcontractors and others because of the 4 different levels of mandates, more at the federal level. But then we had some of the shutdowns, but we're not hearing anything about shutdowns, but there is still concern about might we see mandates. And what I'm hearing is there doesn't seem to be an appetite. I mean, we're definitely hearing that from the employer, from the companies and things. But I'm hearing from both federal and state that there doesn't seem to be a political appetite either, or momentum building for those type of things anymore. Am I hearing that right?
I'd be really
I'm
surprised. Go ahead, Gordon.
No. I think we're both there. I mean, again, even for folks that, think it's important, or I'm sure there's some health professionals that, may want there to be mandates. I think there's a recognition by everybody that the public just isn't there. And, you want people to comply or to do things for the right reasons. And I just think in the environment that we're in, quite frankly, but, everybody's trying to get us to a better place, without those sort of things, knowing how contentious they are and how much fatigue there is over the whole, debate. I mean, I think the CDC really did I get critical, and then I realized it was an impossible situation, but, the got to wear a mask, don't wear a mask, man. We had such conflicting, changing, evolving thing that I think it cooked a lot of the public's trust in, decision makers. And if you then pivot to a mandate, I think it's, problematic. So I think politicians on both sides recognize there's no appetite, even if, some science-based folks might be advocating for it. At least, again, I'm crossing my fingers that we're not going to see some insane variant surge or something, but I do think it's important to, given this volatile time, again, I remember in Seattle when they had a public health authority before COVID, when they were discussing what kind of response they should have locally, one of the check boxes they were going over is, what do we think people would be willing to accept? I mean, that is a part of the public health response. It isn't about just imposing a cookie cutter over the top thing that is at complete conflict. It is, what is the best way for us to accomplish our goals of saving lives in a way that the public will ultimately accept? And I think that is part of the reality right now in terms of, someone asked me if I wanted to be on a bill to mandate the COVID vaccine to all school-aged kids. Now, I said I wanted to get rid of the personal exemption for measles, mumps, the other thing, require all of that for kids. But I said, no, I'm not touching that one, because it's not going to go anywhere. It's only going to inflame people. And no public health expert has come to me saying this is a good idea. So
I appreciate that. Tony, I'll come to you in a minute in terms of some other questions. I know you're monitoring that too, but Congressman, you may have had a comment or so that you wanted to add.
Oh, I just wanted to respond to one of those things that Gordon said on the redistricting. And it seems a lot of Democrats, certainly in my district, buy into this idea that it's the reason for the Republican majority in the Senate and Assembly, and the reason a majority of congressmen are Republican, is because of gerrymandering. That's not true. A way disproportionate number of Democrats in the state are located in Milwaukee or Dane County. And from a congressional perspective, it means probably the 2 congressmen of the 8th that win by the most every time around are Gwen Moore and Mark Pocan. Gwen represents Milwaukee and Mark represents Madison. It's not because of any gerrymandering, though. It's because such a disproportionate number of Democrats are located in those 2 places. And, I may win with 60%, and, Mike Gallagher to the north of you guys might win with 60%. But because there are so many Democrats, and I wish we weren't losing these places by such overwhelming amounts, but so many are stuck in Madison or Milwaukee, it creates a situation, be it Congress, be it Assembly, be it State Senate, in which a lot of Republicans are winning with 60% and the Democrats are winning with 85 or 80%. And unless
and I got to say, you are so dishonest.
Wait. Let me enter, because what I got to do, I got to monitor an employment program, guys, and I can't settle. I can't
let it wander.
The Supreme Court can't settle the gerrymandering issue. Gerrymandering from a political science standpoint back in my day at La Crosse was there. Guys, I appreciate that. One of the really good things, and I want to mention this, and I meant to before we wrapped up, is we just went through one heck of a difficult time in the state over the last 2 years on COVID and the other challenges that aren't political. We all inherited all of that stuff. And the people online from the HR standpoint to keep things going, help people stay employed, working at home transition, but also the help from both of you from a state level and from a federal level. We were well served, politics aside, and all the differences that people may have. If we step back and look at that, despite the differences, that's a hats off to everybody online here and to you guys for what we do. We can't solve some of the political stuff, but we can in this program. But just for a second, if I go back through what we talked about over the last year's outline, it was incredible in terms of the challenges that we all faced and will. I appreciate the fact both of you independently brought up the worker shortage. There is not a business we work with, public sector, private sector, that isn't facing that. That is really helpful to hear from both of you guys. Even if you have different points of view on how to solve it, that's okay. Is that we all recognize that. I got to tell you, hands down, we do special programs just on that, probably twice within this series, just on that issue. So to hear from both of you on that was really, really helpful. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I gotta monitor this a little bit. Let me go to.
I'll make another point. I think Gordon would agree with this. There is always this perception that the Republicans and Democrats don't get along. There are obviously big issues they don't get along on, but I'll be back in Washington next week. I would anticipate 10 or 11 bills passing either unanimously or almost unanimously. You mentioned the COVID crisis last year. There were 4 or 5 or 6 major bills. I could say they probably spent more than they had to, but major bills that passed overwhelmingly bipartisan, which is what happens in most things. And even though there's arguments about the budget, it will pass. It always does on a federal level, probably around Christmas, a little bit late, but there probably will be an overwhelming bipartisan vote on both those things as well. Obviously, the press will always focus on the most divisive issues. You can go to a baseball game every year. Once there's a fight, the fight is what always makes TV at night. But I think the same thing is true in the legislature. I think on a personal level, people get along far better than they realize. And I think there are a lot of bills that are very bipartisan that pass.
And again, just so you know, that's why I brought it up. That's what we see, guys, in terms of, gosh, when you talk about the unemployment rate here in the Fox Valley, much less the state, we're ahead of the game. We're fortunate, going through tough issues. Do we have issues? Yeah, but thanks to lots of people online here and to you guys as we're working through that. Tony, let me go to you for a minute in terms of some of the stuff that you're seeing or questions for these guys.
Sure, and appreciate both the congressman and state representative being available and here this morning. And just to kind of touch upon some of the points that they both made this morning, and just kind of a question that came to mind to touch upon what Jim had just mentioned with the worker shortages and what we're seeing on both the public and private sector. And I believe it was the congressman that had mentioned CDL licenses. And one thing that we're hearing about is there have been the new federal regulations as far as entry-level driving or driver training requirements. And we're hearing about a variety of employers having severe challenges finding drivers and qualified, and then also meeting these new training requirements, and then the cost in going through these programs to meet the requirements, and then what employers can do in response to that. So just curious whether either one of you have heard anything in that regard.
I know there's been a joint program with one of the tech schools south of here, or actually, south of you guys at Moraine Park, in which they're partnering with one of the Washington County firms. And they recently graduated, can't remember how many, another 12, 13 drivers. They're going to start up another program in the near future. And I think it's something we have to do a better job of publicizing, because right now, if you could drive a truck, you're going to live the American dream. And you're right, we have to get more people in this field. I'm all for doing what I can to remove or to not put additional burdens on people. I think right now our laws are fine as they are. And I do think it's something we have to do a better job of presenting for young people, something they can do, because it is, easily find people 70, 80 grand a year driving a truck right now.
Gordon, anything you see on that? I know you had brought it up earlier, so.
I mean, we see this on a number of issues. I know that we had things trying to, convert military experience and, transportation to, quicker ways to ultimately earn a CDL. In a number of areas, we're seeing, we did this with education. We did it with certified nursing assistants, where we reduce the hours of training required to be able to get the license. I mean, we are seeing attempts at trying to, make it easier. Obviously, we don't want to water down the standards that are out there. But I feel like, look, if it helps at all and there are considerations that we can do, or there's things that we can remove the obstacles that could get in the way for people to, if they're true obstacles, then, then we should consider it. But I still feel like it's window dressing if we think that these are the kind of, this isn't going to ultimately fix things. I don't know how many people that are out there are saying, well, I would get my CDL, but, this. And so I think, we want to take the feedback that we're hearing, regardless of what the profession is. And if there are things in place that the state can change to remove obstacles, to move things forward, to be a credible incentive, then I think we want to do it.
Let me just add this as a follow-up to Tony and I had met with an employer group just last week up in the northern central part of the state, and the CDL discussion had come up, and it was two-pronged. One was the training and the aspects for those that already have the CDL, and a lack of trainers and there is stuff through the tech school, which is very helpful, but not enough resource to get enough trainers. For what it's worth, if there's monies allocated to help with that, that's to preserve the base of those that with the CDL. The other aspect of it, Gordon, as you mentioned, was encouraging more people to get the CDL. And then coupled with that, just for your guys' benefit, the discussion also is the whole impact of the drug testing aspect of it, the surrounding areas with the law changes with marijuana and legal or not legal, a 0.02% drug test aspect at a federal. It's just conflicting right now. I don't know the answer. I don't know what's right or wrong, not for the program, but just to share with you guys some anecdotal information from discussions we have about all of that, which, Gordon, you're right. It's one small piece of a big puzzle, no question about it, but every little piece that we can all add, that just some feedback that we've heard on that, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I'm all for the little pieces. I'm a little more worried about, politicians are as guilty as anybody of beating their chest and said, look, I fixed the CDL problem. It's about managing that, and what is the best use of any resources that we have. Whenever we do one of these, tax incentive things to, people will take advantage of it. The question is, will it bring new people, to the field? And so you just want us to be honest about what it does and doesn't do, and that there's not a cost associated with that action.
Appreciate that. We are, this happens every year, guys, we run through an hour in about 10 minutes. And I really appreciate the input that you guys have provided, and respecting your time and the time with everybody online. If either of you have any closing comments that you'd like to make, that'd be great. But I think we probably wrap up. And for our legislative program, we're going to spend another month where we'll just go through some case law and some other stuff that Tony and I do. But this is really helpful and much appreciated, and much thanks to both you and Tony for putting materials together and other things for the program today. Any final words, guys?
Thanks for having me, and we look forward to hearing about those examples in my office.
Will do. Gordon?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And despite my strong disagreement with Congressman Grothman, he was the Republican I worked with in the Wisconsin legislature more than anybody else. And I still look forward to seeing him at the farmer's market next time, despite my disagreement with him.
Okay, well, look forward to seeing Gordon one of these Saturdays in the near future.
And I'm first to say that I get to see it firsthand in terms of people having strong differences of opinion, but being professional, bringing a sense of civility to our process, and we are well served. So thanks to both of you. Thanks to Tony. Thanks to the chamber for putting the program together. And with that, thanks to everybody, and everybody have a great day.